Hi everyone, John Heath here again for MiltonRose Learning with another Let's Learn video on animal farm context. Okay, so we're going to be unraveling all the horrors of untrammeled power and Soviet socialism in this one. Okay, so we're going to be having a look, obviously, at underpinning, looking at some of the key context which underpin the kind of allegory. Then we'll be teasing apart some of the context in action, so obviously things such as the Russian Revolution and totalitarianism. And then we will finish, as we normally do, by having a good look at three of the best contextual quotes, which you can then drop into your essays. Okay, so first off then, let's have a look at some of the social context. So there we go. Okay, so first off then, with the portrait of Stalin there, totalitarian rule then in terms of social context. So the novel or novella reflects concerns about the rise of regimes like Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, a totalitarian communist state where power was concentrated in the hands of a single leader, a big dictator, almost a godlike ruler, such as Joseph Stalin. And George Orwell was quite kind of worried about power being concentrated just in the hands of one ruler. It makes it very dangerous in some ways. Also, the kind of text is exploring class struggle. So Marxist or communist ideas about class conflict are explored in the text. So Old Major's speech at the start reflects a hope for equality, that the animals can be treated equally and actually have a nice life rather than being exploited. But the pig's rise to power in the text shows how revolutions can start very nice, but then they don't always end very nice. They can get betrayed and you can end up in a worse situation than when you started. Okay, then we have George Orwell. So the text itself was written during World War II, 1943-44, and it was released in 1945 at the end of the war. So Orwell wrote Animal Farm as an allegory, almost a big kind of metaphor for the Russian Revolution, which took place in Russia and obviously became the Soviet Union. And he's warning about the dangers of totalitarian regimes. You know, they can't be trusted and they amass too much power in dictators' hands. And they never do what they say as well. They lie constantly. So there's a fear of propaganda and control. The violent descriptions of Napoleon, who's the lead pig on the farm, and his apparatus of power highlight Orwell's concerns about propaganda, basically political lies, and the manipulation of the truth to maintain power. He argues that Stalin in Russia, who Napoleon represents, was kind of lying and manipulating the truth to kind of suit his ends, and it was basically one big set of political lies, and that's what the text is kind of really skewering and kind of critiquing. Okay, then we have the lovely image of the pigs there. Orwell's views. So what does Orwell actually think in terms of context? Well, obviously this text is an outright critique of totalitarianism. Orwell is warning us, all of us, against the dangers of absolute power, showing how revolutions can start very beautifully, but then they lead to tyranny and terror. Okay, nothing ends particularly well. Also, the corruption of ideals. So Animal Farm critiques how ideals of equality and fairness, which sound really good on paper, but they can then be corrupted during a revolution, and highlights the power of political lies. So Orwell has a very dim view of the Soviet Union and revolutions in general. They never seem to live up to their promises. They promise the earth and they don't deliver very much, basically, is Orwell's kind of perspective. Then let's see how this kind of how this context plays out in the text. So first off, it's very much a Russian Revolution allegory. Okay, and an allegory is when characters in the text stand for people in the real world. So for instance, Napoleon, who's the lead pig on the farm, he symbolises the leader Joseph Stalin, who was the leader of the Soviet Union. So an allegory is kind of where all the characters stand for people in the real world. Okay, really good term for your essays. So the rise and corruption of the pigs mirror the key events and the figures from the Russian Revolution, and Orwell critiques how power can corrupt revolutionary ideals. Okay, it's never as good as it seems on the surface. Then totalitarianism and propaganda. So Squealer, who's a little pig on the farm, and he's like the propagandist, he's like a political liar. Squealer's manipulation of language reflects how authoritarian regimes use propaganda to control the truth and maintain power. So you can't just keep control with a gun to the head of everybody in society. That wouldn't work. So what you have to do is you have to kind of manipulate and lie to the public, so they just believe that you're a good person and that they won't cause trouble in society. So propaganda is at the heart of this text through the character of Squealer. Then we have class inequality. So there's a widening gap between the pigs who take over and all the other animals, such as the sheep and the cows and things like that. And it shows how the promises of equality can quickly be betrayed, because at the start the pigs say, yeah, we're going to share all the apples around and everyone's going to kind of like live the dream. But then they just go back on those promises and they just start betraying all the other animals. And that echoes in real life the failure of communism to deliver fairness for all. Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union promised a socialist utopia. It was going to be a perfect world for workers, but then they end up getting executed or sent to the gulag, or terrorized by the NKVD. And so communism, just like on the farm, communism did not deliver fairness for all, and it just delivered a new form of inequality. Okay, now let's have a look at some of the key contextual quotes. Okay, some very very nice images there. Okay, so we've got a pig at his desk. So first off, the corruption of power. So the pigs on the farm say this quote: all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Okay, which is obviously almost nonsensical. So this ironic commandment shows that those in power, they twist the ideals of the revolution for their own gain. Okay, so it just kind of is used to justify the pigs being on top. So Orwell then, through that quote, is critiquing how revolutions can lead to new forms of oppression, and that mirrors Stalinist Russia, because Stalinist Russia was a pretty grim place to grow up in, and the Russian kind of revolutionaries at the top were the ones with all the power, and the workers just had nothing really. So it's kind of a real kind of damning critique of the Soviet Revolution. Then we have someone I always feel sorry for in this text. We have a Shire horse called Boxer, which in that nice image there. And he always says in the text, I will work harder. So whenever something doesn't go well, he always says, I'll work harder and I'll make it work. Okay. Now, Boxer in the allegory, he represents the working class who work really hard, but they never get anything good out of the whole system. So Boxer's mantra reflects the blind loyalty and the exploitation of the proletariat. It's a great term for your essays. The proletariat means the working class. Okay. And Orwell uses him to show how hard-working individuals on the farm or in Soviet Russia are used by the regime and then discarded. Okay, because Boxer, as you'll read in class, Boxer suffers a horrible fate. He works really hard for the revolution on the farm, and then they just kind of bin him off and get rid of him. Okay, so it's actually really, really sad. I always feel sorry for Boxer. Okay, and then we have the big pig himself, okay, Napoleon. Now, this quote is said by Boxer, but it's kind of mimicked by all of the pigs on the farm. Napoleon is always right. Okay, obviously an impossibility, because all kind of no creature is infallible and we all make mistakes. But nevertheless, on the farm, it's Napoleon is always right. So this quote highlights how totalitarian leaders manipulate the masses into obedience to basically just get them to agree. So it reflects how propaganda replaces independent thought. You can't really think anything about Napoleon other than, yeah, he's great. Okay, so it kind of kills independent thought. And again, that's a reflection of Soviet rule, because during the Stalinist period in Russia, you could never, ever question Joseph Stalin. You just had to agree. Otherwise, it's to the gulag or execution. So it was extremely brutal. So again, a really fantastic contextual quote for your essays. Okay then, so let's just round up with a nice little summary at the end. So we've started by unpicking some of the key contextual factors around totalitarian rule, Joseph Stalin and the horrors of Soviet Union, and as well Orwell's views about that, critiquing totalitarian leadership. We've picked apart some of the key context in action. The most important one for me there is that this is an allegory of the Russian Revolution. That's very, very important. And then we've rounded up with some of the key quotes around the corruption of power and how propaganda is used to manipulate the masses in totalitarian regimes. And so hopefully those quotes will be very good for your essays. So it just remains to say, if you found this video useful, please feel free to hit the like, subscribe and the bell icon as always, because that helps the channel to grow. That's really, really helpful to us. And obviously we'll be back soon with more Animal Farm content, I'm sure. And it just remains to say, obviously, thanks for watching and take care. See you soon.